Design sprints are potent. In just 5 days, you can use a design thinking process to uncover insights, prototype an idea, and then test it with users. But what next? Now what? That was a great process. It seems to show some potential. But where do you take your prototype from here? If you're not careful, nothing will happen. It was fun, it was revealing and maybe inspiring, but taking the next step can seem sometimes daunting. And momentum can come to a swift end. So how do you actually bridge the gap between exploration and launch, between ideas and outcomes? Keep listening to today's podcast to learn about a 6-step plan you can follow after a design sprint so you actually release something into the wild. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Ben Aston, founder of The Digital Project Manager. Welcome to the DPM podcast. We're on a mission to help project managers succeed, to help people who manage projects deliver better. We're here to help you take your project game to the next level. Check out thedigitalprojectmanager.com to learn about our training and resources we offer through membership. This podcast is brought to you by Clarizen, the leader in enterprise project and portfolio management software. Visit clarizen.com to learn more. So today I'm joined by Douglas Ferguson, and Douglas is an entrepreneur. He's a human-centered technologist. He's the founder and president of Voltage Control, and he's the author and co-author of 3 books, How to Remix Anything, Start Within, and also Beyond the Prototype. That's what we're going to be discussing today, and that's about a roadmap for navigating the fuzzy area between ideas and outcomes. So hello, Douglas, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
And we are on a Friday afternoon, and it's getting hot in here. So we're at the end of the week, but let's finish this with a bang. I want to find out a bit about your story, how you got into design sprinting, and why you think this is interesting and useful and applicable.
Well, I think every component of my history kind of led to where I'm at. It's like I feel like there's stepping stones all along the way. And I guess I'll start by saying that early in my career, I was a software developer, and I got into leadership. And as a software developer, I was always really curious about the intersection of technology, the market, and design. And so form, function, feasibility, desirability, all those things were kind of forefront for me. And so as a leader, I typically was really not only focused on how we're going to go about implementing it technically, but it's the why we should build it and what exactly we need to build and how it comes to life. And so that involved a lot of really understanding the process that we use to build software and how we get teams working better together and, design processes, et cetera. And so whether it be agile, lean, et cetera, we were dabbling and experimenting with it. So I caught on to Jake Knapp's early blog post, and we were trying out design sprints at my last startup. And then Google Ventures invested in the startup. And so Jake and the design team at Google got to come down and work directly with us. And so that first-hand experience, watching them, the masters of design sprints who had done hundreds of them, who had created the process and adapted it, numerous times. It was really eye-opening. And I think that experience led me to have opportunities to run them for other people, because they saw that I worked directly with the inventor, and they said, "Hey, come show us what you learned." And then those experiences led to other experiences to where I've run hundreds of design sprints for folks, and now have even started to over the years stitch together many other different disciplines of facilitation to build an even broader practice. And so we've developed our own workshops and continuously in search of new methods and new even modalities to bring in, because there's so many silos out there. We're really interested in supporting the broader facilitation community and bringing all those silos together.
Cool. So in terms of bringing those silos together, are you talking about design thinking meets service design meets lean, or what are you talking about?
Yeah. So gosh, there's facilitation frameworks that are rooted in the architectural community. So Certainly these, MG Taylor, is one example. And architects have, for years done charrettes and types of things. So they have ways of bringing people together to make decisions and to collaborate. There's things in the social justice space. There's the art of hosting. There's relationship building frameworks like authentic relating. There are certainly methods from design thinking. There are other industrial design type of critiques and different tools that people use. And so those are the silos we're talking about, because usually when someone's introduced to ways of meeting, to ways of making decisions, they usually, especially if they resonate with those things, they will tend to go deep. They will tend to really identify as part of that, part of that movement, if you will. Right. And there's a real risk of becoming dogmatic because it's easy to fall in love with the thing that opens up new possibility for you. But we also have to equally unlearn those things and realize that like there's different ways of doing it, and not everyone was introduced to this way of thinking in the same way you were. And so being more of a growth mindset of like, how else can we apply this thinking, and what else is there out there? That's kind of what I mean by busting the silos. And it's a bit of a chocolate and peanut butter type of thing, right? Like, how can we come up with these new combinations of things to really elevate the experience that we're creating? Because ultimately, if we think about our meetings and our collaboration sessions as experiences, and we apply some service design type of thinking, and even like learning experience design techniques, we can really elevate those moments and get even more business value or more momentum out of them.
That's cool. And so, in terms of your role at Voltage Control, your day job, what do you actually do?
Yeah, so as the founder and president, I end up doing almost everything. So every day is a little bit different. Some days I'm facilitating, so I'm still actively engaged in execution of workshops. So I might be designing a workshop or facilitating. I might be training a group of people on how to do this work. So training on how to facilitate or how to apply learning experience design principles to your workshops. Or I might be coaching someone one-on-one. I'll appear on a lot of podcasts for the book. I'm actively writing another book. And, some days I'm preparing and writing content for our website and blog. And I started my own podcast. So, some days I'm recording for that as well. So it's quite a mixture of things, still involved in sales and marketing and client management. So sometimes I'm sending out thank you notes. So it's quite a bit of things, and we're still on the grand scheme of things for a small organization. And so even though we started to specialize a bit, everyone's doing a lot to kind of keep things on track. And, I think the whole team's really skilled, and everyone kind of contributes in all the ways they can.
Awesome. And so what are some of the challenges you're dealing with right now? You're still executing workshops. You're bringing together people in your teams. your role is really broad there, but what are some of the bigger challenges that you're having to deal with?
Yeah, there's, of course, like we're in a pandemic that creates a set of challenges because we had to retool everything to be virtual. Yeah. And we were a remote team. So we were no stranger to the tools and methods and approaches for working with the distributed team. However, our marketing, a lot of our products were not dialed in and tuned to work in that space, that environment. There are a lot of methods and approaches that we use that, quite frankly, just assume that we were in the same room. For instance, cadence and turn taking take on a different life altogether in the virtual space. And so also agendas have to shift. The timing is completely different now when we're talking about designing for the virtual space. So there's a lot of principles that we still apply. We can still lean on the purpose that we brought to this situation, but there's some new constraints we had to consider, and new opportunities for that matter. I'd say another big challenge is operationally. The logistics around what we do can be quite challenging, and so as every time we bump into another level of scale, there's this extra complexity from managing quality and follow through and delivery, and making sure those things happen consistently and in a way that is representative of the experiences we really want to deliver for our clients. And so that's something that I spend a lot of time kind of worrying about and planning for the future.
And so as you've made this transition from real life workshops, facilitation, to taking it virtual, hey, so it'd be great if you could expand a bit on thinking through everything going virtual, everything becoming remote for everybody. How has that changed and actually adapted the process that you use and the tools that you use to do that? I'm curious if there's any adaptations you've made to the process itself, and if there's any tools that have facilitated that, or actually that you've dropped using because you're having to work in this virtual remote world.
Yeah, there's certainly some tools that we continue to use, like Session Lab's one of my favorite tools. That's a tool for planning schedules and agendas, and maybe we use it even more, especially because we're redesigning some things that we had already had in place and that were working really well for us. And so now we have to reimagine some of those things. And so it's coming even more handy now that we've had to rely on it more. The other thing that I think has shifted a bit is our use of Mural. So these virtual collaboration space is even more critical now, because we don't have Post-it notes in a room with each other. So that's important. And also, heavily using Zoom breakout rooms, and I think Cisco WebEx Trainer has breakout room support, and some people have successfully used Google Meet. I think there's a browser plugin that kind of mimics some of this capability, and Microsoft Teams. But with both of those examples, you have to you had to create all the extra rooms, and then you can't remotely move. You can't remotely move your participants in and out of rooms like you can with Zoom or WebEx Trainer. And because of that, we've developed some of our own tools, because there are some things that we do live in person, some games we play that require a certain mode of interaction, and the tools just didn't support it. And so we created a tool called Control Room that we use, and we're currently working on some breakout room support, because one of the issues with the existing breakout tools solutions is that especially if you can go with a conference room tool like a Hopin or a On24 or a AirMeet, then those tools are really designed to try and mimic the hallway conversations and the serendipitous interactions that kind of happen. And so you can do breakouts, but the breakouts are going to be very loosely controlled. And then inside of a Zoom, they become very tightly controlled. Yeah. And these tools are very opinionated on tight and loose, and none of them support both. And if you're going to do a really highly facilitated, with intention and purpose session, then you want to be able to move quickly between tight and loose, because there's going to be moments where I need to bring people together for a plenary session and maybe explain some things and then send them off. There are going to be some times where I want to put them in a group and then a group of 2, and maybe merge those groups of 2 in a group of 4. And that's tight control, but with loose direction, they can explore and maneuver within that tight control. Other times I might want to do an open space where I set up different affinity groups and people can go to their place of their choosing. And so we've really found the challenge and the lack of versatility. Like the tools are opinionated and they're simplistic in their view. And so we've had to build some of our own software to work around that. And there's still lots of room to grow. We're still not 100% there, but I definitely say we use Zoom and Mural quite often. Session Lab is really handy for making those agendas too.
And as you are doing things virtually, your role as a facilitator then becomes quite administrative as well, as you're figuring out, okay, let's break up in groups of 2, and then you're kind of doing it all. So does it require an additional role to do all that kind of functional facilitation rather than just there's that making the decision, let's break up in groups of 2, and now setting all that up in real time. That's quite a lot of work. So how do you manage that virtually?
Yeah, it's if the tools were easier, it wouldn't be quite as daunting. But I can tell you, especially if you're merging and expanding groups and things, like it's very time consuming. And because of that, we usually recommend having 2 facilitators, which is kind of a conundrum because a lot of times people come with the expectation that virtual is going to be cheaper for some reason. And, my response is always like, well, it is cheaper because you don't have to fly anywhere. You don't have to rent a room. You don't pay for lunch, etc. But it actually requires more labor. And sometimes we manage to pull it off with one facilitator, but you had to have a very understanding crowd if you're going to do that, because if you're really focused on, doing the production aspect where you're moving people around, then you're not going to be holding space for the participants. It's going to be difficult to read the room and to comment and do the kind of the verbal facilitation kind of stuff. And so because of that, we really recommend having 2 people. The production stuff is not always it's not really a full-time job per se, because so usually that the second facilitator is potentially a scribe as well, so they might be capturing all the things that are happening, so we make sure nothing's lost. Sometimes it's more of a tag team kind of effort, so you might have 2 facilitators that are kind of equal masters, if you will, and they just kind of trade off. So it's like, hey, I'll launch this breakout room because you're going to be leading this module, but then I'm going to lead this module, so you'll get my back on the breakouts. And it's not just about moving the levers inside the software. It's also really helpful to have another set of eyes just scanning the grid and looking at the chats, because if you're in the moment, kind of instructing or really listening to a conversation, it can be hard to like read and catch other things that are flying by or people. It's in a room, we've spent years and years and years and learned from people who had spent years and years and years before us how to behave inside of a room full of people and pick up on subtle cues. And there's body language and shifts, and you can see motion out the corner of your eye. You have your periphery. We don't have any of that in the virtual setting, and then we have this extra burden of chats and these other distractions and things. So having another person who's on the lookout for that stuff, what we call reading the room, is really critical.
Cool. Well, let's dive into talking about what next after the design sprint. And to set the scene, we've been talking about facilitated sessions, and many of these kind of activities that we talk about would happen within the context of what Douglas mentioned earlier, and that is a design sprint. So if you haven't checked out Jake Knapp's book, Sprint, it's an amazing 5-day process for idea generation and revolution, in which you uncover insights, you prototype something, come up with some ideas, choose the best ones, test them with users, and then by the end of the week, you've come up with something that's been validated. And I've been involved in a few sprints, doing everything from the future of lottery and what that looks like to something quite tactical, the future of a website. So if you've not done one yet, you should. You can come up with loads of ideas in a really short amount of time and actually validate them within a week. So as a process, it can be really helpful for idea generation and getting to a point where something is validated. You don't just come up with the ideas. You don't have this situation where clients kind of throw their weight around coming up with ideas and choosing their own ideas. Actually, it all gets validated and vetted, which means the quality of the ideas at the end of the week that you get to are normally much better. But what you actually do next is tricky. And, well, it depends on the situation. But a guide would be nice. And so now there is one. And so for anyone who hasn't read Douglas's book yet and you're listening to this, the book is called Beyond the Prototype, and it's a roadmap for navigating the fuzzy area between ideas and outcomes. So I want to talk about this problem, though, that you see, and obviously this is why you wrote the book. So for anyone who's unfamiliar with design sprints, at the end of day 5, it's normally Friday afternoon at this point, where are you left? And you talk about the post-sprint slump. What is it and why does it happen?
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons why it happens. I think that the thing that folks should keep in mind most is that the design sprint is atypical of how most projects unfold. So most of the time we build momentum gradually over time. And then often we build it, lose it, build it, lose it in little spurts. And then there's a deadline that's looming. And then we just like really, really haul at the end to get it all done. That's right. A fairly common scheme, right? Yeah. Or maybe it's fairly linear with some little bumps along the way. And so when we flip that around and we gain a ton of momentum up front, that can be really disorienting and unexpected. And so first and foremost, people need to understand that this will happen, that going through a design sprint is going to yield a ton of momentum. And if you're in a big company, you don't know what that feels like and you've never seen this before, you're going to be standing at the top of the mountain going, whoa, how did I get here? And then it's going to all slowly slip away like air just seeping out of an inner tube. And so we don't want it to go to waste because we magically got all this progress. Let's make sure we make use of it. And so if we don't start making use of it, we just lose it. And then we get into this mindset of like, it's almost like depression, right? It's like, oh, we knew what it was like to be up there, but we're not up there anymore. And it's like much harder to get back up to make use of this. It's sort of like, you could jump off with the hang glider now, or you could just like slowly, just walk down and then try to use the hang glider, like, 3/4 of the way down the mountain. It's like not gonna be as effective, right? And so the book's really about how do we harness all that energy we built up. And the best thing to do is just to know that it's going to be there. And then there's a lot of upfront work we can do to set the stage and make sure that we set the initial conditions for the design sprint to be successful. And one of those initial conditions is understanding that this momentum is going to be there and we should be ready for it. And one of the things that people struggle with is thinking that the design sprint's everything, right? There's a ton of talk about how magical it is, how awesome it is. And the reason that people get that excited about it is because of all this momentum you can build. Well, the irony of it is like if you just build it up, hype it up, and expect it to be the be all end all, you'll walk out and then not be able to harness the momentum it does create because you don't anticipate or prepare for the work that needs to come after. And so absolutely not the be all end all. There's going to be work to do after to take this thing through. And sometimes, it's about making sure that we reserve resources, whether that's money or people or time. And then also another thing I see people grappling with is, not knowing who's going to own it, because innovation can yield brand new thinking. And if we don't have a vice president or a department to support whatever this, we have a matrixed organization and then we invent some new thing, then this may not fit on the matrix neatly. And so who owns it? And so that could be a conversation that needs to happen. And so preparing for these things ahead of time, kind of anticipating them, knowing that we're going to need to address some of these things, can go a really long way. And then, of course, there's just tons of tactical stuff that, like, making sure we pick the right decider, which is a role in the design sprint. That is maybe one of the number one reasons people can't harness the momentum, is because they come out of the design sprint and the real decider rears their head and shuts it all down. And they say, hey, like, why did you decide to do that? And it's like, oh man, why weren't they in the room? Like, if they're going to be the one calling the shots, they need to be in that decider role.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think what you're talking about here, I mean, I'll go over the steps, and your steps are for this roadmap well, firstly, wrap it up, share your story, chart the course, expand the inner circle, cultivate the culture, and get guidance. And the first two steps of that process, I think, are something that we can do ahead of time, right? So I think sometimes when we're planning a design sprint, so much effort goes into planning the sprint itself that we don't think about those next two steps, how we wrap it up effectively, how we share the story of what's happened in order to create the credibility, to buy the mandate to continue the project or continue the initiative. And I think an important takeaway for us as project managers, as we're thinking about, okay, how do we give life to this process and extend its shelf life beyond the week? Well, I think it's to be thinking about, and I love what you talked about, thinking about the resources that you need ahead of time. And I think it can be really hard to plan a design sprint because of the number of people that you need to get involved, to get the clients and the stakeholders and the decider in the room for a full week, as well as all the resources on your team. It can be super tough. And I think sometimes if we're just focused on that week and we don't think about, okay, well, what about the next week when we're wrapping it up and we're sharing the story to show what we accomplished and why that's important. If we haven't thought about that as part of the project, then we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot because we're not setting ourselves up for success for the implementation. So thinking about this step 3, which is we've wrapped it up, we've kind of shared our story, charting the course for what happens next. Now, at the end of the design sprint, we come out with some validated ideas. Ideally, the user testing that we've done has been successful, and we've got some really good insights on some ideas. So what I want to kind of dive into a bit more is how you then effectively chart the course. There's different ways of doing this. Some ways that I've been involved in is that we then go into another design sprint, or we actually go into parallel work streams of design and development, or whatever that might be that we're building. But how do you then take these ideas that come out of a design sprint and transform it into something actionable, or a roadmap for development in a way that makes sense?
Yeah, I think this is a really critical topic, and one that's not discussed nearly enough. And I would say that you could write an entire book on how to even package up ideas and results of ideation sessions for agile projects specifically. And so this chapter highlights a few of those things and talks about the mindset that you need to take to that. And the next version of this is expanded quite a bit. The thing that I love the most is this notion of milestone moments. And, for instance, if you're trying to learn Spanish, you don't want to just say, I want to become fluent in Spanish. Set these intermediary goals so that you can have little victories along the way. And these little victories can be celebrated, and you can reward your progress, and it keeps you engaged. And so if you can take that same philosophy to your project, and then look at where the destination as you see it today, and think about what are these little moments that we can hit along the way, and think about waypoints. And as we're hitting those moments, we're kind of reassessing, is our destination still correct? Are we on path? And allow that to guide the flow of work going forward. And so that can be an interesting way of thinking about organizing the work that you're doing in a way that's not that dissimilar from Agile. And so the fact that as we're exploring these next steps, you're already starting to kind of mirror some of those behaviors, but maybe in a looser way. We're not quite as stringent on this kind of like Scrum kind of stuff, but we're starting to think about what are these milestones we're hitting, and some of these things what we need to understand in order to really package it up for the product team. Also, you mentioned a follow-on design sprint. So there's like, people talk about the iteration sprint. There's, you could certainly iterate through multiple design sprints. Even just thinking about, whether you might it might be necessary to do a couple in parallel, and then do them together potentially to kind of explore some other territory, because design sprints really targeted and tight on a specific goal. And when you're doing these iteration sprints or these kind of parallel nested sprints, you can also shorten them and rely on some of the work that's already been done in the initial sprint, which can be helpful, because we still want to follow some of these approaches and some of these methods that we can find success in. We just don't need to necessarily all the steps. Now that we've gotten some momentum, we can kind of repeat some of the constituent parts of the design sprint. So really thinking about how we might design some meeting systems and some workshops that'll help us kind of continue to learn and continue to borrow from that culture. I'll also talk about sharing the ugly baby. We don't want to, similarly, we should have adopted this mindset of like test and learn. So like we built a prototype and shared it with users. Well, we should be willing to share that with people regularly, and continue to learn and continue to iterate. And also, we want to make sure that we are thinking about our metrics and we communicate those metrics. I think often people get in trouble when they don't take a moment to think about what are the critical components of success, and how do we even know when we're going to pull the plug. And that can be great for setting expectations to leadership, because if they start asking tough questions, then we can say, well, we certainly haven't seen success yet, but we said we would pull the plug if this happened, and we currently haven't gotten there yet. So let's trust our plan and continue to map toward those metrics. Can be really liberating. I also talk about user story mapping, and I think that's a really fantastic tool to from a product development standpoint. And I believe it's something that you can introduce really early into the planning cycle to help start to add a little fidelity to our understanding of all the constituent parts of what we're building, and kind of lay it out in a user journey type flow. It seems like a fantastic time to start doing that type of thing, versus waiting until now we're full on developing this, and kind of almost seems like a lot of teams are doing it retrospectively, if you will, because they're already in the flow of something. They've already started to build something, and it's like, oh, we should be mapping this to figure out like our next sprint or whatever. And so before we even get started, it can be a really great activity to kind of prioritize and understand like how we might cut what an initial release might be. And then also can be helpful for identifying further experiments we need to run before we start even cutting an initial release.
Yeah, and I think what you're talking about here about generating momentum, keeping momentum, and identifying those small wins to continue the enthusiasm and momentum for the project are really key. And I think one way that you can do this, as you talk about in the book, is through user story mapping, thinking about the user journey and identifying what the pieces of functionality are on that user journey that we can create in order to optimize the experience. And it might be that as we're developing the next thing after the design sprint is normally we're going to be developing some kind of MVP. And a really useful lens for prioritizing those user stories on the user story map is thinking through the feasibility, the viability, and the desirability. So is it technologically feasible? Is it economically viable? Is it desirable from a human point of view? Do people actually want these things? And I think evaluating pieces of functionality on that user story map can really help us drill down to the MVP. And I think really aggressive prioritization is really key for us developing that MVP that is actually something that is going to be feasible, viable, and desirable, getting something out the door so that we hit that milestone of we released something. But can you talk through some of the prioritization techniques you use in establishing your MVP to get something out the door and to generate momentum?
Yeah, for sure. Desirability is a big component when we think about prioritization. So when we're doing initial interviews with prototypes, we are listening deeply to gain insights into, what resonates with the user, how they're reacting to this. Does it bring them delight? Does it get them excited to use the product? Does it solve a need, a problem that they seem to be desperately seeking to solve? Those insights usually drive prioritization in a very obvious way. Like it's usually super clear after having these conversations what we need to prioritize and deprioritize. If we are kind of tied on a few things, then the old faithful Eisenhower matrix is always handy. Prioritization over impact. And, if something's going to have a high impact, which we probably know from the interviews, then we can look at if the ones that are the least amount of effort, so we can prioritize those first. We also need to look at it from a offering or portfolio standpoint. When we think about how features relate to each other and how they tell a story. For instance, if our product vision looks small and maybe not cohesive, then we might want to consider adding other things so that the user understands the vision, because we certainly don't want them to think to pigeonhole us or to think that we're heading down a path that we're not. So it can sometimes be a branding decision or a perception decision that might help us like round out the MVP and make it to make it more understandable, believable. So we my point is that there may be beyond just the desirability and that important versus difficulty mapping. We also need to just think about the things that really sell or explain or allow the user to perceive things. So I think that makes it that helps us dip into that realm of viable. Yes. So I think that can really help us on the viability front, because what it does, it helps make the story understandable and relatable. And so we need to make sure that people don't stop using it because they perceive it to be something that it's not, or like that there's not a lot of value, even though it solves this problem. What's the bigger problem that sits within or relates to? So just thinking from an ecosystem or a holistic standpoint, I think is important, because sometimes I see MVPs getting lost in the notion of like, well, what's the smallest thing we can build? Right. Well, does it make sense to build that? Does it even like, does it like show the vision? Is it marketable? So like, what is that holistic thinking that we can apply to it? And so I encourage people to think a little more deeply. There's two other lenses we want to look at as well. We want to look at like risk. So like, where might we have assumptions? Or if we're wrong about something, how might that blow up in our face? And right. if there are things that, if we're looking at stuff and we're like, well, if we were wrong about this, it would be really, really bad. Well, it's like, well, we better go like address that, right? And so we can go attack our riskiest assumptions first, and that can tend to really help with some of this prioritization. And then the last thing I'll say is there an opportunity to delight? And rather than just thinking of MVP as, hey, here's this really simple, brain dead, easiest way, cheapest way, most economical way to solve the problem. We get it out there to validate. Well, is there any way to add a little delight, a little surprise, a little joy? If there is, we should consider it, because life's too short, and users will always prefer to be delighted.
Definitely. And I think your emphasis here on changing the mindset, and I think as project managers, we're very output orientated. We're thinking about, okay, well, what are the things I need to deliver, and how will I get to delivering them? I need to think about the budget, and need to think about the timeline and the component pieces, so that I get my deliverables, so that my outputs happen. And I think the way that you're framing this is a really useful mindset to be thinking about, is that shift from outputs to outcomes. Like, how do we actually see the change that we want to see? It's not about necessarily creating the widget. It's the outcome that comes as a result of us creating that. So are there other ways that we can get to that outcome? And thinking about prioritizing for the MVP around generating an outcome rather than necessarily the outputs that deliver that outcome. Now, one of the things that I just want to touch on before we finish is your step in here, the last step, which is all about getting guidance, knowing when to reach out to the experts. And I think this can be, a tricky thing for people trying to source the right voices so that you don't create too much noise within the project or the initiative that you're working on. So what's your insight that you can give on knowing when to reach out? When does it make sense, and when should you kind of stick to your guns and just plow on with what you believe in?
Yeah, I mean that's I don't know, that's a tough one, because I've seen so many people listen to interviews and then say to themselves, "Oh, we didn't recruit correctly," and then they're just constantly making excuses of why the world doesn't want to see things the way they see them. Yet you have people like Steve Jobs, who managed to somehow like distort reality. My advice to people generally is, that's fewer and further between, and you just know that you're making a very, very risky bet if you think you're going to shift people's behaviors in some way. And if you feel super strong about it, you got the money to burn to find out, then maybe go for it. But in my experience, most people don't have the money to burn, and most of the time they are a sample set of one, and they are they're typically sorely mistaken. And I've gotten to the point where I've had to just stop even trying to judge this stuff ahead of time, because I'll often hear a founder with an amazing idea, and I get excited, I'm like, oh, this sounds cool. This totally work. And then, a few months later, I bop into them again at the local accelerator or whatever. And I'm like, how's it going? And they're like, oh yeah, no one really wanted that. And like, oh wow. Okay. So I don't know. It's like, I think the design sprints taught me one thing, and that is like, we got to talk to humans and validate this stuff, because no matter how smart and intuitive we are, we're going to be missing something.
Yeah. I mean, let's talk about that. Where does it all go wrong? Like, where have you seen this unravel? We talked right at the beginning about momentum falling because it's not wrapped up properly. The story isn't sold. A course hasn't been charted. And obviously we have this problem as well, where the insight is just not actually, we might have validated it or thought we validated it, but maybe we didn't validate it properly. So where do you see it all going wrong in that post-sprint phase as people chart the course from design sprint to MVP? Where did it most typically fall apart? What are the things to watch out for?
So, it's interesting because it makes me think of the later chapter, Cultivate the Culture, because that's really kind of what you were alluding to, which is people don't they're not cultivating the culture of the sprint mindset. They're just kind of going back to normal, to business as usual. And so that can go wrong often. I see people getting excited about the design sprint, getting people to clear the schedules, and they, go in, do the work, and then they kind of come out afterwards and, just go back to the sprints they're working on. And, here's the roadmap, and here's the delivery cycle, and we have this due next week and this and that. And they go back to the factory, and making the widgets, like punching the buttons. And if we can adopt the sprint mindset and imbibe that into what we do, where we start like pulling out the methodologies, testing, learning, really continuing the prototype, continuing to put that in front of users. I love this IDEO concept of if a picture is worth 1,000 words, then a prototype's worth 1,000 meetings.
Yeah. And
so that's, again, there's lots of things that can go wrong, but in the context of what we're just talking about, the big thing is that they're just going back to business as usual. And so if you do that, there's little hope that much is going to happen out of what you learned in the sprint, because we have to continue to refine the prototype. We got to kind of plan around this new project that's unfolding. And we got to continue to learn, because although we've got some cool insights, we probably don't have them all, and there's a lot more to discover about where the potential lies.
Yeah, I think that mindset is so important. I think that's what's great about the design sprint. Where you begin is unpacking. It's understanding what's the background, what's the situation, what's the business challenge we're trying to solve. How does that align with user needs met and unmet? And I think, if there's one thing that's super important in this process as we're thinking about what happens after the design sprint, is to not lose focus on why we're doing it in the first place. We're trying to deliver an outcome. We're trying to incrementally increase value. And it's as we do that we will see some of the change happen that we want to see. So, Douglas, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been great having you with us.
It's been great here. It's been great being here. Thanks for having me.
Cool. So I wonder what your hacks, tips, and tricks are for design sprints and in that post-design sprint phase. What are you doing that works? What doesn't work? If you have checked out Douglas's book, let me know what you think. But if you want to learn more and get ahead in your work, come and join our tribe with DPM membership. Head to thedigitalprojectmanager.com/membership to get access to our team, templates, workshops, and AMA sessions, office hours, ebooks, and more. And if you like what you heard today, please subscribe and stay in touch on thedigitalprojectmanager.com. But until next time, thanks for listening.